Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping straight into a huge moment in history, the Battle of Little Bighorn. I mean, everyone knows it as Custer's last stand.
Yeah, and it's one of those events, right? It's like the Alamo, the popular stories all about this heroic, tragic ending.
A doomed fight against impossible odds.
Exactly. But the sources we're looking at today, military reports, historical accounts, they paint a very different picture. This wasn't some noble sacrifice. It was a catastrophic failure in strategy.
And it was engineered by a brilliant and, frankly, massive Native American force.
Highly coordinated.
So that's our mission here. We want to get past the myth and really look at the military truth of it. How does a Lieutenant Colonel, George A. Custer, with about 225 men in his direct command, get completely annihilated?
Not just defeated. Wiped out.
Yeah, wiped out. And what can the sources tell us about the sheer scale and, the tactical genius he was up against?
So we're talking about June 25th and 26th, 1876. This is in the Montana Territory, right along the Little Bighorn River. And it was, without a doubt, the U.S. Army's worst defeat against the Plains Indians ever.
A decisive Native American victory. But to get why it happened, we can't just start with the battle. We have to go back a bit.
You have to.
Okay, so let's unpack that. If the annihilation is the end of the story, what lit the fuse? Why were they even fighting in the first place?
It really all comes down to broken promises and resources.
Money.
Yeah. The foundation for all of this was the U.S. government violating the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty.
Okay, and that treaty was supposed to guarantee the Lakota rights to the Great Sioux Reservation.
Exclusive rights. And that territory included the Black Hills, which is the crucial part.
Right, because the Black Hills weren't just, some piece of land. They were sacred, spiritually vital.
The absolute heart of the Lakota world. But, the sources are clear. The thing that really kicked off the Great Sioux War wasn't ideology. It was greed. Gold. Discovered in the Black Hills in 1874.
And that's it, isn't it? The moment gold is found, that treaty becomes basically worthless to the U.S. government.
It just evaporated. You had this unstoppable flood of miners pouring into legally protected territory. And Washington's response wasn't to stop the miners.
No, of course not.
It was to force the tribes to come back to the reservations. They gave them a deadline.
Which is basically saying, give up your way of life or we're coming for you.
That's it. And what happened next is just this massive defiant resistance. You have leaders like Sitting Bull who just refused.
You weren't going to do it.
No. So instead of coming in, all these different bands, Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, some Arapaho, they started gathering together. For the buffalo hunt, yes, but also to defend their land.
So this isn't just a few people running from the army. This is a deliberate mobilization, a statement.
It was. And it became the largest assembly of Plains Indians, ever. And that's the context Custer was walking into. He wasn't chasing a few hundred warriors. He was heading straight for a unified nation that was ready for war.
This is where it gets so fascinating because the image we all have in our heads of this battle is just, it's wrong. It's Custer against a small band of fighters.
Right. But the sources, they show a scale that is just staggering.
And when you look at it from the tribe's perspective, you realize what Custer was actually facing, a huge coalition.
Led by some legendary figures. You had Sitting Bull, the great spiritual leader who, had visions of this victory.
And then the military tacticians on the ground.
People like Crazy Horse and Gall. This wasn't a mob. This was, for all intents and purposes, a general staff.
So they set up this village along the Little Bighorn River. How big are we talking?
I mean, it was colossal. Historians now figure the total population in that camp was somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 people.
Really? Hold on. 10,000 people? That's bigger than a lot of American towns back east at the time.
It wasn't a camp. It was a city. A moving city.
How do you miss that? How does your scouting not see a city of 10,000 people?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It speaks of Custer's arrogance and, the speed at which they all gathered. He was looking for a group on the run, not a massive force waiting for him.
And the actual number of fighters?
That's the key number. The estimates we have put the number of warriors at somewhere between 1,500 and 2,500.
1,500 on the low end.
Experienced, motivated fighters who knew that terrain like the back of their hand.
Okay, let's do that comparison again. Custer marches in with his immediate command of about 225 men.
Yeah.
If he's facing 1,500 warriors, that's what, 6-7 to 1 odds?
Roughly. And if it's 2,500, it's more like 10 to 1.
10 to 1. I mean, the battle is over before it even starts. He was supposed to locate this force and wait for backup.
Right, wait for the other columns to arrive. But he found them, and he decided, nope, the glory is mine, and it's mine right now.
Which just sets the stage for total disaster. This brings us right to his fatal tactical mistakes.
There are a few, but they all compound each other. The documents show a series of just inexcusable decisions.
So let's start with number 1, the timing. He attacked too early. Why not wait?
He was terrified they'd get away. He thought if he didn't hit them immediately, they would just scatter and he'd have to chase them for weeks.
He's still thinking he's chasing a small, scared band.
He is. He's operating on a false premise, which leads right to his second huge error, underestimating the size of the village. If his scouts had reported back a city of 10,000 people, the entire plan changes.
He would have had to wait.
He'd have no choice. But the third mistake, this is the one that sealed their fate. He divided his forces.
Okay, so he splits the 7th Cavalry into 3 main groups.
His own, one under Major Reno, and one under Captain Benteen, plus a pack train.
Now, splitting your force isn't always a bad move, is it? I mean, it's a classic flanking maneuver.
It's a standard tactic, sure. But it only works if you're stronger than the enemy and you can support each other.
And he was outnumbered 10 to 1.
So the moment he split his men, he just created 3 small, isolated targets for one massive, unified enemy.
And this is where the native leaders just completely outgeneraled him.
Oh, absolutely. Crazy Horse and Gall saw the vulnerability immediately. They didn't panic. They responded with a coordinated tactical takedown piece by piece.
So what do they do first?
They hit Reno's column, which attacked the south end of the village first. They just swarmed him, drove him back into the trees. And when Reno tried to retreat across the river, Gall's warriors turned it into a total rout.
So Reno is neutralized. He's pinned down, fighting for his life.
Exactly. And Custer has no idea this has happened. He's moving along the ridge to the north, thinking he's about to hit an enemy that's running away from Reno, right towards him.
But they weren't running.
No, they were turning. Warriors under Crazy Horse launched this just devastating counterattack. They used the terrain, the ravines to just swallow his men.
They flanked the flanker.
They turned his maneuver into a trap. Custer's command was surrounded on that ridge almost instantly. They were picked apart from all sides. The battle for his battalion was probably over in under an hour.
An hour.
Maybe less. It was brutal, and it was fast.
And Reno and Benteen, the other columns.
They were stuck on the bluffs, completely isolated, just trying to survive. Benteen eventually found Reno, and they dug in and held on for almost 2 days until help arrived.
But they couldn't help Custer.
No chance. The whole disaster was a direct result of Custer's decision to divide them without any way to support each other.
The military lesson is just... It's incredible. The native forces didn't just win, they clinically dissected a U.S. Army regiment.
Which brings us to the aftermath. And the numbers.
The numbers that hit the American public like a shockwave.
Every single man with Custer, somewhere between 225 and 276, was killed. The total U.S. losses were around 300.
And the native losses?
The sources estimate around 50 warriors.
50, so 300 U.S. soldiers for 50 warriors. That ratio says everything about the tactical mastery of that defense.
It's not a defeat, it's an annihilation. And remember, this is happening in 1876, America's centennial year.
Oh, wow. The timing just makes it so much worse from their perspective.
It magnified the shock completely. Our sources say it shocked the nation. A defeat this total was seen as a national disgrace. It was intolerable for Washington.
So the reaction had to be massive.
It was. And that is the great bitter irony of Little Bighorn. This huge tactical victory became a complete strategic defeat.
How so?
Because the shock spurred what the sources call massive retaliation. Congress opened the checkbook, the Army sent in thousands more troops, and they began a relentless campaign to hunt down every last free band.
So this amazing victory actually gave the U.S. government the political will and the public support to just finish the job once and for all.
That's exactly what happened. The retaliation was overwhelming. By 1877, less than a year later, it was over. The victors of Little Bighorn had been hunted, starved, and forced onto reservations. The resistance was broken.
So when we step back, what this deep dive really shows is that Little Bighorn wasn't a heroic last stand. It was a tactical disaster born from broken treaties, a gold rush, and a commander who completely underestimated his enemy.
He failed to grasp the scale, the coordination, and the brilliant leadership of men like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and Gall.
And the ultimate takeaway here is so stark. A great victory on the battlefield doesn't always mean you win the war.
No, The native forces were masters of the battlefield that day, but their victory was so complete, so shocking, that it provoked a response that they couldn't possibly withstand in the long run.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? They achieved this incredible military victory, probably the greatest single victory against the U.S. Army, and within a year, it all turned to dust. What does that say about resistance when you're up against a force with, well, seemingly unlimited resources and population? It's a tough question about how these conflicts really end, something for you to think about as you dig deeper into this history. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking on a name that is just, well, synonymous with military disaster, Lieutenant Colonel George A. Custer.
And specifically, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, June 25th, 1876.
Right. But we aren't here for just a simple battle recap. Our mission for this deep dive is more forensic, and it's custom tailored for you. We're going to sift through the sources to really understand Custer's tactical thinking.
And the critical misjudgments he made in those final hours, the ones that absolutely guarantee the annihilation of his command.
We dove into, well, every dispatch and account we could find detailing his decisions about the 7th Cavalry's deployment. We're looking for that exact moment the data failed him.
You can almost picture it. Custer, standing on a ridge, looking out over the Little Bighorn Valley. It's about noon, June 25th.
And he decides, right then and there, to just scrap his entire plan, the safer plan.
Yeah. So the big question we're trying to answer is this. What?
Yeah.
What were the knowledge gaps? What caused him to abandon what was, sound military procedure?
And what did he actually think was going to happen? It's the story of flawed data crashing headlong into a very deeply entrenched doctrine.
Exactly. The original plan was to attack at dawn on the 26th. Let the men and horses rest, consolidate the force.
But then something changes. All of a sudden on the 25th, the clock just speeds up. Why the sudden pivot?
Well, the sources make it really clear. Custer was driven by one single overarching fear.
Detection.
His scouts had confirmed the camp's general location. They could see this massive pony herd and smoke rising from the lodges. It was huge.
And this is where his own past experience kind of becomes a liability for him, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
In almost every single previous fight he'd been in, if the native parties detected the cavalry, what did they do? They broke camp, they scattered.
They'd just vanish into the hills, and trying to chase them down would be this long, frustrating, and usually pointless effort.
Right. So to Custer, the risk of losing the village entirely, it just felt bigger than the risk of attacking right away, even if his men weren't fully prepared. He felt he had to strike now.
Before the opportunity was gone.
Yeah, before it just evaporated.
So he scraps the dawn attack, he launches an immediate assault on the 25th, and his main strategy, the centerpiece of this whole thing, was a massive three-pronged pincer movement.
This is the moment. The decision to divide his forces.
Yes. And the source material on his deployment orders, it shows his key goal wasn't just to fight. It was to split the 7th Cavalry into 3 distinct battalions.
Some accounts even say 4 if you count the pack train guard.
Right. But the goal of this pincer was to prevent escape. He wanted to trap the entire village, warriors and all, from multiple directions at once.
Let's break that down, because the way he split the regiment is absolutely key to understanding everything that happens next.
Okay, so who went where?
The regiment was fractured into 3 main groups. First, you have Major Marcus Reno's battalion. He was given the direct frontal assault.
So he's supposed to hit the village from the south end, the main distraction, really.
The main distraction force, exactly. Then you have Captain Frederick Bentine's battalion.
And on paper, their job looks strange. They're sent on this massive ride off to the left, to the south.
It was a flanking maneuver, specifically to block any escape routes. He was worried they'd flee south or west into the really rugged terrain.
And that leaves Custer himself.
Custer keeps 5 companies, about 210 men, under his own immediate command. His plan was to strike the village from the north, circling around while Reno had them pinned down.
But wait. To an outsider, splitting a force of barely 600 men into 3 columns that can't even support each other right before attacking an enemy of unknown size? I mean, that sounds like military malpractice.
It does now. It absolutely does. But that's the critical point of this whole deep dive.
This was standard procedure.
Custer was operating strictly by the book. This was established U.S. cavalry doctrine for fighting on the plains, a doctrine developed over the last decade.
So this wasn't reckless, not in his mind. It was a proven method.
Proven against mobile scattering villages, and the sources confirm it. It wasn't just theory, it had worked before.
You can point directly to Custer's own victory, back in 1868?
The Battle of the Washita, that was the textbook case for him. At Washita, he divided his forces, attacked a Cheyenne village from multiple directions at dawn, and it was a huge success.
Because it hinged on hitting a camp when they were disorganized, surprised, and distracted.
Exactly. The objective was never to fight a pitched battle against thousands of warriors. The objective was always about psychological and logistical control.
And this gets to the core of what Custer was actually trying to do, something I think a lot of people miss. He wasn't just planning an attack.
No. He expected a very specific domino effect, all based on that past experience. He thought Reno's attack would draw in the bulk of the warriors.
Tie them up, keep them busy.
Right. And then Benteen, coming from the flank, would be in a position to either reinforce Reno or just tighten the net, pinning the fighting force down.
And while all the warriors are busy fighting Reno,
Custer swoops in with his 5 companies from the north or east and captures the non-combatants, the women, the children, the elderly.
the sources are so clear on this. The end goal was to capture the families and use them as leverage.
That's the key. He wasn't planning a massacre. He was planning a hostage-taking action to force the entire camp to surrender. It relied on this deep assumption that the warriors' main goal would always be protecting their families, not standing and fighting.
So the playbook was sound, if, a very big if.
If you're fighting a small, mobile enemy that just wants to escape.
But what happens when that assumption is completely fatally wrong? This is where the intelligence failure just takes over. Let's unpack the central error in his reconnaissance.
The most critical misjudgment was, shockingly simple. He just completely underestimated the village's size.
He looks out across the valley, sees a big camp, but his estimation of who he could fight was just wildly off.
He was relying on assumptions from distant views. He wrongly concluded the force was maybe half or even a third of its actual strength.
And just to put this in perspective for you, the listener, based on his guess, Custer thought he was attacking maybe 400, 500 warriors, a number his 600 cavalrymen, even split 3 ways, could handle.
But the actual numbers, when you look at the data from the sources, they're just staggering. The sheer scale of his miscalculation is hard to wrap your head around.
How big was it really?
This village was unprecedented. Estimates put the total population at 8,000 to 10,000 people.
Wait, 8,000 to 10,000? That's not a camp, that's a moving city.
It's a mobile city, basically the size of a major regional hub back then, like 1870s Denver or Omaha. And more importantly, that population was supported by a fighting force of somewhere between 1,500 and 2,500 warriors.
2,500?
Massed, motivated, and ready to fight. Custer thought he was starting a skirmish. He was actually attacking a prepared army.
And this wasn't just a math mistake. This was built on him actively ignoring intelligence he was getting in real time. What were the specific failures?
It was a cascade. 3 massive data failures that just compounded each other. First, the reconnaissance was just incomplete. It was all done from distant ridges.
He wouldn't send his scouts in closer to actually see how big it was.
No. He refused to let them get close enough to gauge the true length of the village along the river. They couldn't count the lodges, and when they tried to tell him how big it looked, he just filtered it.
Which brings us to the second, and probably the most tragic, failure. He just dismissed the warnings from his own Native American scouts.
Yeah, men like bloody knife. The sources confirmed they were telling him. They were giving him data points about the camp size, the sheer number of people, data that flew in the face of his own expectations.
But why didn't he listen?
He had such faith in that Washita playbook. Any data that suggested the enemy would actually stand and fight a real battle, or that their numbers were overwhelming, he filed it away.
He saw it as exaggeration or maybe timidity from the scouts?
Both. He believed they were afraid because he knew what a big village looked like. And to him, this was just a big one, not a historically massive concentration.
And you can't overlook that third piece of context. He was totally unaware of the shift in Native resolve.
A huge piece of the puzzle. The sources point out that just weeks earlier, at the Battle of the Rosebud, these same forces had already shown they were willing to stand and fight a major battle.
Which indicated a fundamental shift in their whole motivation. This was a unified, prepared defense.
And Custer either didn't know or didn't care. He was acting like he was still fighting the scattered bands of 1868.
So you have this confluence of failures. Incomplete scouting, ignored warnings, and outdated assumptions about what the enemy would do.
And it all leads instantly to the fatal consequence. That divided strategy, which needs a weak, scattering opponent to work. It just instantly left his battalions completely isolated and unsupported the second those 2,000 warriors mobilized.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. Connect this divided strategy, the one that was supposed to be sound doctrine, to the final annihilation of his command.
It became a disastrous, incredibly rapid chain of events. When Major Reno started his attack from the south, he wasn't met by a few distracted warriors.
He was met by an overwhelming force.
Immediately, his position became untenable in just minutes, and that forced his rapid, very disorganized retreat back across the river and up onto the bluffs.
And with that retreat, Custer's whole strategic assumption just vanished.
Gone. The pinning action he was counting on Reno holding their attention, it never happened. Reno was routed, and the entire fighting force of the village was now free to turn its attention elsewhere.
And Benteen, the guy sent to block the escape route.
Benteen was too far away. He was on that long, distant flanking maneuver. Too far to help Reno, and crucially, way too far to help Custer.
So Reno is retreating, Benteen is out of the fight entirely.
And it compounds the isolation of Custer's 5 companies from the rest of the regiment, right at the moment they needed every single man they could get.
So Custer, riding along his flanking route, thinking he's about to find scared families, he's suddenly confronted by what?
By a massive mole army that had already defeated one of his battalions and was now focusing entirely on him.
Isolated, surrounded, and overwhelmed by numbers that were literally 10 times what his doctrine had prepared him for.
The result, as we all know, was total annihilation. The strategy, successful in the past against smaller targets, failed instantly. It was a good plan for an enemy whose goal was escape.
But it was instantly deadly against a prepared army whose goal was a decisive fight.
Absolutely. The deep dive takeaway here is pretty clear, I think. Custer's plan was standard military doctrine for the context he thought he was in.
A strategy aimed at control through hostage leverage.
But the execution was sabotaged by a catastrophic intelligence failure. It wasn't just recklessness. It was the active dismissal of crucial real-time data from his own people.
Maybe his ego was secondary to his dogmatic, misplaced faith in an obsolete playbook.
Which really raises an important final question for you, the listener, to think about. Custer based his whole approach on dividing his forces to capture non-combatants. Given the reality on the ground, 1,500 to 2,500 masked warriors, was there any available cavalry doctrine at the time that could have dealt with that?
Could anyone have successfully engaged a force of that size? Or was this battle lost the second that bad reconnaissance led to that immediate decision to attack?
Yeah.
A question of doctrine crashing into a reality Custer refused to see.
Could any military leader of that era have survived that much bad data?
We'll leave that one with you to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a stack of sources you sent us about one of the most famous moments in American history, the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Custer's last stand, as it's often called.
Right. And in June 1876, the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho forces, they achieved this just stunning tactical victory. They completely wiped out Custer's command.
It really was. I mean, by any military standard, it was a decisive win. They had better tactics. They had the numbers that day. But, and this is really the whole point of our deep dive today, that incredible success was almost instantly flipped on its head.
Flipped how?
The U.S. government used it as the perfect justification for a massive, unprecedented retaliation.
It's the ultimate historical irony, isn't it? You win the battle so decisively that you guarantee you lose everything else.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to look past the battle itself and really unpack what happened immediately after. The policy shifts, the new laws, frankly, the brutal tactics that followed.
Mm-hmm. We're going to trace a direct line from Custer's defeat right to this infamous sell or starve policy. This wasn't just some accident of history. It was a calculated political move.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The immediate reaction. For you, the listener, just imagine the context. News of this defeat hits the East Coast in early July 1876.
Right around the country's centennial celebration.
Exactly. The timing couldn't have been more shocking. You might think Washington would, pause, maybe reflect on what went wrong. But our sources say the opposite happened.
The reaction was visceral. Custer was instantly turned into a martyr in the press. And the narrative wasn't, we made a mistake. It was, this was a savage massacre.
So that outrage, that public anger, it fueled the political will for what came next, a massive retaliation campaign.
It redefined the entire Great Sioux War. The government didn't slow down. They threw gasoline on the fire. Generals Sherman and Sheridan, they immediately ramped up plans for a winter campaign.
And what did that escalation actually look like on the ground?
It was overwhelming. Troops just poured into the region, completely shifting the balance of power. Before Little Bighorn, the U.S. strategy was sort of fragmented. After, it became a kind of total war.
But not just against the warriors, right?
No, and that is the critical point. They used a dual approach. 2 prongs. The first was obvious: more soldiers, more fighting.
And the second?
The second was starvation. They knew it was hard to pin down nomadic tribes on the Great Plains, so they decided to destroy their ability to survive.
So you're saying they weren't just fighting warriors. They were targeting the entire infrastructure of life itself.
That is precisely it. They started systematically destroying villages' homes with women, children, the elderly, and at the same time, a relentless campaign against the buffalo herds.
I just can't imagine the psychological impact of that. Watching the very foundation of your world, your food, your spirituality, just being eliminated month by month.
It was deliberate. The goal was coercion through destitution. So when winter came, the very same tribes who had won at Little Bighorn now had no food stores. They couldn't hunt, and they were surrounded.
Surrender becomes the only option left.
The only option besides mass death.
Okay, so you have this physical siege happening out on the plains. How quickly does that become a legal chokehold back in D.C.? That feels like the real pivot.
It was stunningly fast. Custer's defeat gave President Grant and Congress all the political cover they needed to just throw out the last bits of the old peace policy.
That was a policy of, trying to use treaties and negotiations first.
In theory, yes. After Little Bighorn, all that restraint was gone. This was about retribution, and it was about resources.
The Black Hills.
Black Hills, where there was gold. The problem for the government was that the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 explicitly protected that land for the Sioux Nation forever.
And that treaty had rules, right? You couldn't just change it.
It required the consent of 3/4 of the adult male Sioux population to change the treaty, a huge legal obstacle.
So how'd they get around it?
They didn't try to, they just bypassed it. Congress passed something called the Indian Appropriations Act of 1876, just a few months after the battle.
A financial bill. Sounds pretty dry.
It's always the boring sounding stuff, isn't it? But attached to this bill was a legislative rider. And that rider was the weapon.
This is the sell or starve mechanism.
This is it. It was a direct punitive strike for the victory at Little Bighorn.
And let's just underscore this for the listener. Withholding rations. That's a death sentence, especially after the Army had already destroyed their other food sources.
It was unambiguous. The rider stated that the Sioux tribes would get 0 government rations food they needed to survive the winter until they did 2 things.
Or were they?
1, formally cede the Black Hills, and 2, agreed to relocate to smaller reservations.
And just like that, they forced the sale of 7.7 million acres.
Including the sacred Pahasapa, the Black Hills. The Great Sioux Reservation was cut by more than 1/3.
Wow. Was there any pushback to this? I mean, using starvation as an explicit tool of government policy, did anyone object?
There was very little effective dissent. The public anger over Custer was so strong, it just silenced any opposition. Grant's administration basically treated the tribes as hostile enemies who had broken the peace.
Even though they were defending their own land.
Exactly. So in their view, any means were justified. Treaties didn't matter anymore. The speed of it all is what's so defining.
So let's pivot to the aftermath. After this dual assault, military and legislative, what was the long-term impact on the leaders, on their whole way of life?
Well, recovery was basically impossible because every path to independence was blocked. Faced with starvation and relentless pursuit, the leaders had no choice. They had to surrender.
And this happened fast. This wasn't a slow decline over decades.
Incredibly fast. By early 1877, just over 6 months later, most of the major leaders who had fought at Little Bighorn, people like Sitting Bull, had either surrendered or had to flee to Canada.
And for those who surrendered?
They were confined to these much smaller reservations. Their nomadic life was over. But the government went even further. They started dictating culture.
Okay, so this goes beyond just taking land. This is forced assimilation.
Absolutely. The sources are very clear on this. The tribes were mandated to switch from their traditional hunting lifestyle to sedentary agriculture, farming.
Which is a profound change. You can't have a hunting culture if the buffalo are gone, your land is taken, and your food depends on you picking up a plow.
It was designed to be destabilizing. The buffalo hunt, the horse culture, that was the foundation of their entire spiritual and social world. Forcing them onto small plots to farm was a way to break that system.
A complete restructuring of their society.
Federal agents literally used farming as a tool to civilize them, to destroy the tribal structure from the inside out.
So, connecting all these dots, what's the big picture here?
The big picture is stark. The defeat of armed resistance, which was ironically triggered by their greatest military victory, cemented federal dominance over the plains. It cleared the way for more settlement and locked in a program of cultural suppression that lasted for generations. Little Bighorn was the last gasp.
So, looking back on all this, the key takeaway from our sources really seems to be the devastating speed and efficiency of the U.S. government's response.
Yes. The victory at Little Bighorn didn't buy them anything. It just revealed the government's ultimate weapon. It wasn't cavalry.
It was Congress.
Congress and the control over food. It showed that policy and resources were far more powerful than any army the tribes could field.
And I think that leaves the final provocative thought for you, the listener. Just think about the time frame. The battle is in June 1876. The sell or starve rider is passed by August. The winter campaigns begin. It's all over in a matter of months.
A military achievement is completely nullified.
So the question to think about is this. How swiftly can political will and the control of something as basic as food turn a military success into a strategic defeat that forces a complete cultural overhaul? That quick, cold turn proves that the ultimate battlefield isn't always fought with guns.